This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China's northeastern Heilongjiang province emerges as new COVID-19 hotspot amid an upsurge in infections worldwide. We'll look at how countries in Africa are reassessing their COVID-19 containment measures and enforcing new measures. And an African president shows how people should be exercising during lockdown conditions. Hello, this is Africa Live coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories coming up this hour. The African Development Bank sets aside $10 billion to help African nations deal with COVID-19. In sports, Kenya's safari rallies return to the WRC circuit to take longer as the event gets postponed. We begin with the latest on COVID-19 pandemic. The global total of confirmed cases has surpassed 1.6 million. 95,000 people have died. The US has reported more than 16,000 deaths. Cases there have surged past 460,000, more than a quarter of the global total. Nearly half of all cases are in Europe, with Spain and Italy the worst hit. Iran, the epicenter in the Middle East, has registered more than 66,000 infections. A new COVID-19 hotspot is emerging in China's northeastern Heilongjiang province. The city of Suifenhe, bordering Russia, has reported 151 imported cases and nearly 150 asymptomatic ones. The whole city is now on high alert. It has put all residential communities on lockdown and all border crossings have been temporarily closed. A temporary hospital is being constructed to deal with the surge of new patients. The 600-bed facility is expected to be ready by Saturday.
Heilongjiang province will coordinate all medical resources to deal with the epidemic. We are planning targeted and centralized treatment strategies. Patients will be sent to different hospitals designated to treat those without symptoms, mild symptoms, and those critically ill.
Local officials in China's Hubei province have briefed the media on the situation there.
There's no imported case. In the province, other regions out of Wuhan have for 36 days in a row reported no new confirmed cases. As of April the 9th, in the province, we still have 351 cases hospitalized, among which 54 cases in severe conditions and 49 in critical conditions. On April 9th, the number of the new asymptomatic cases was 18, none of them developed into confirmed cases. We have removed 17 cases from quarantine, and we still have 675 asymptomatic cases under medical observation. After the outbreak of the COVID-19, all the cities have carried out this patriotic campaign for health. We have put the focus on the management of farmers' markets and also improved the control on the environment. We have shared the knowledge about the disease and raised the awareness of the people about the COVID-19. We encourage people to wash their hands, to reduce their departures, and also to wear the masks. Currently, we are at a critical moment of the fight against the COVID-19, and we are carrying out the patriotic health campaign on the basis of the community, the neighborhood, and also units of work of the government in order to have the zero epidemic.
Meanwhile, the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has raised concerns over the rising number of coronavirus cases on the continent.
These numbers in context. When last week we briefed with you all, our numbers were still around 7,000. So between last week and now, we have increased by almost 4,500 cases or infected individuals. That is a rapid increase in our numbers, and we continue to be very concerned with the direction and trajectory that this virus is heading in Africa.
To discuss this further, we are joined live by Dr. Mary Stephens. She is the Technical Officer at the World Health Organization Regional Office for Africa, and she joins us live from Geneva. Dr. Stephens, thank you for joining us. The World Health Organization has warned that countries in Africa could be heading for a peak in their COVID-19 cases in the coming weeks. What prompted these observations?
As you are aware, the outbreak in Africa started later than other regions. So we started having our first case in Egypt on 14th of February, and then in Algeria on 25th of February. And from that, from February to date, we have seen the outbreak evolving very, very fast in the region, moving from one country affected. Now we have 52 countries on the continent that are affected with the outbreak, and 45 of these fall under the WHO Regional Office for Africa. We have also seen increase in the number of cases. So, but the outbreak is evolving in different countries differently. So basically, some of those countries that started having cases earlier are beginning to report more cases than the recent countries that just started reporting cases. But we are seeing like the epidemiology is basically almost similar to what you see globally. We know that one person can infect 2 to 3 people, and this is exactly the same thing we are also seeing in Africa. So many countries that are reporting quite a number of cases, the cases continue to increase by the day. So, but what makes the difference basically is going to be the response measures we put in place in terms of early detection of these cases, isolation of the cases, testing and confirming, treating those that are confirmed in the facilities, and monitoring all their contacts for 14 days, including observing the preventive measures of social distancing, hand hygiene, and also the cough etiquette.
Okay, so Dr. Stephens, some concerns have been raised about the side effects for patients put on ventilators as they recover from the COVID-19. What's the WHO position on the use of ventilators?
Ventilators are life-saving machines. So people that require the ventilators are basically those that fall under the critical patients. So we saw from the statistics in China, 80% of the cases are going to be mild, about 15% will be severe, and 5% will be critical. So now, out of this percentage, this 5% of people will end up in the intensive care unit, and these are the group of people that would require the use of ventilators. So medically, when a patient requires ventilators, ideally you should allow the patient, or the doctor should use the ventilators for the patient. Yes, we know in medical practice also that sometimes the doctors have to make difficult decisions to save lives. So looking at disadvantages and advantages of whatever treatment they need to institute, and then to make the decision based on that. So basically, anyone that needs the ventilators should have the ventilators, because if you have to look at the disadvantage also of not using the ventilators, what happens if you don't use the ventilator? The patient will die. So you have to look at both sides of the coin and make that decision. So the concerns, if you look at medical treatment in general, yes, whatever drug you take might have some side effect, but if the benefit outweighs the disadvantages, then you have to make a decision to give the patient an opportunity to live. So this is what I'm going to say concerning the use of ventilators. It's possible that it might have some side effect, but the benefit definitely outweighs the disadvantages, because if you don't use the ventilators for this critically ill patient, you will end up losing the patient at the end of the day. So doctors will have to make that decision to provide the opportunity for this patient to live following, of course, the COVID-19.
All right, Dr. Stephens, we appreciate those insights. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Mary Stephens, Life Forester in Geneva. Now, coronavirus cases in Egypt have surged past the 1,000 mark. The country has said it is now entering the third stage of the epidemic, which involves community transmission. A nighttime curfew to curb the spread of the virus has been extended by another 2 weeks. The government is assuring citizens that it is capable of handling their health needs during this time. CGTN's Adil Mahroui reports.
During the first week of April, Egypt reported more COVID-19 cases than it did the previous month. With officials expecting an increase in daily cases, the virus is now spreading at least 4 times faster than it did in March.
We've reached 1,000 cases in the expected time, but we're now on the verge of entering stage 3. Egypt is estimated to reach the peak of infections in May.
The Egyptian president is leading the government's efforts to curb the spread of the virus. He attended a display of the country's military healthcare facilities. El-Sisi has maintained that Egypt is well prepared to face the pandemic.
I tell the Egyptian people, we are ready for all scenarios. The healthcare power you see before you should be a source of comfort to you. We have the resources and the capabilities to face all challenges.
To limit infection rates, the government has extended its partial curfew by another 2 weeks. It has asked citizens to abide by the social distancing regulations to help contain the disease.
The most important factor I must stress is citizens to abide by regulations. To take them lightly or to think that our numbers are still far from rising could see us suddenly lose control of the crisis, and we may face a repetition of catastrophes seen in many countries which are struggling to face the pandemic.
Recently, several hospitals have reported COVID-19 cases among their medical staff. With a faster spreading rate, the virus is now threatening operation at several healthcare facilities during this outbreak crisis. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
A team of scientists at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases and the South African Bioinformatics Institute have announced the successful genome sequencing of the first local sample of SARS-CoV-2. This is the genetic footprint of the virus which causes COVID-19. It will help scientists to understand how the virus moves from one person to another and how the spread of the disease can be contained.
But it's easy to criticize when you're on the outside. But I think it's important that we don't forget the contributions that China have already made in this outbreak. Number one, they sequenced the entire genetic material of the virus. And then they shared this genetic material with the entire world so that the whole global scientific community can get access to this genetic information. And this was huge because it helped us to start developing detection tests where there were none before for this virus, and to fast-track vaccine and antiviral research, again, where there was none for the current viral outbreak.
Meanwhile, China is starting to get back on its feet, but the Asian giant is helping the rest of the world with relief efforts. Countering criticism over the origins of the virus, scientists in South Africa say COVID-19 should not be politicized.
This is not a China virus. It's been wrongfully called a China virus. This is a virus that now affects the whole world. Every single country is now involved and has a responsibility to deal with this virus. So if we can help, why not? But we did what we thought was best at the time when we had information at our disposal. So yes, there was some room for improvement, but we acted a lot faster than many other countries did, maybe even many Western or developed countries. And I think because of the way we acted, we turned out to be a lot better or a lot better off than most of the countries because we took a swift and decisive action early on in the outbreak.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been moved out of intensive care after 3 days of treatment for COVID-19. Officials say he has been moved back to an ordinary ward. The 55-year-old Conservative leader received oxygen treatment after he was transferred to an intensive care unit on Monday. The UK government is set to extend a lockdown implemented on March 23rd. Its death toll is approaching 8,000, the fifth highest in the world. Let's now get the latest from our correspondent, Tony Waterman. Tony, how is Europe preparing to handle the economic shocks once countries emerge from the current COVID-19 lockdowns?
Well, a number of European countries have been putting forward plans worth hundreds of billions of dollars to help with the support and recovery after this pandemic is over with. But we saw really a breakthrough last night when it came to a bloc-wide response. The European finance ministers were able to work past some very deep divisions and approve a proposal for a $550 billion recovery package. This is a three-pronged approach. It includes a very large support package of about $110 billion for EU workers. Of course, many of them out of work now as factories, restaurants and shops have been idle for weeks. It also includes $220 billion in loan guarantees for companies which are struggling right now. And for countries, it allows some credit lines into the bloc's $450 billion bailout fund. The holdup on that had been on whether or not there would be conditions attached to those low interest rate loans, but in the end they were able to overcome their differences, and the only requirement now is going to be that that money go towards supporting healthcare systems. So there is a plan in place. Finance ministers also agreed to a very large recovery fund, but they left out some very important details on that, including around the size of that fund, when it will be ready, and how it is going to be financed. They punted those decisions over to EU leaders who will be meeting next week.
And Tony, what can you tell us about the coronavirus situation in Italy, Spain and the UK?
Well, as I'm sure you know, Italy and Spain are the number one, number two hardest hit countries, certainly in Europe. But when it comes to the death toll worldwide, what we're starting to see there is that the number of deaths is stabilizing and the number of new confirmed cases is actually starting to go down quite significantly. The Spanish Prime Minister said that the fire is now coming under control, but it's certainly too early to start easing up on lockdown measures, and the parliament there extended a 15-day state of emergency. This is really becoming the big issue here in Europe now, is what do we do as we approach the end of these lockdown measures? In some countries, we're already seeing them lift those measures. In the Czech Republic, earlier this week, they started allowing people to go out and exercise, and then non-essential shops like hardware stores actually opened just yesterday. So we're starting to see an easing of these restrictions in some places, but in other places, the lockdown is continuing. Here in Belgium, they're going to be meeting next week, and they're thinking about putting a second edition, a second extension onto the lockdown period, which has already run for 4 weeks now. The problem here is that you have different countries at different stages in this outbreak. So while things may be coming under control in Italy and Spain, a place like Hungary is just on the upswing now. They still have a low death toll number, under 100 still. But the concern is that if certain members of the bloc start easing these restrictions, it could backfire and then reignite this outbreak.
All right, Tony, thank you for that. Tony Waterman live for us in Brussels. Now, there are more than 12,300 confirmed cases of the coronavirus across Africa. Of Africa's 54 countries, Comoros and Lesotho are the only two yet to report a case of the virus. Africa has had 632 deaths and over 1,600 recoveries. Experts have warned that fragile healthcare systems in many African countries could be overwhelmed in the face of a severe outbreak of COVID-19. Many countries are rushing to stem the spread of the disease by imposing curfews and lockdowns, as well as tightening travel restrictions. Let's take a look at the numbers in Africa as the virus continues to spread across the continent. In North Africa, Egypt now has 1,699 confirmed coronavirus cases with 118 deaths. Algeria follows closely with 1,666 infections, while Libya and Sudan maintain the lowest tally. In West Africa, Burkina Faso has 443 cases of coronavirus, while Cote d'Ivoire has 444. The number of infections stand at 378 in Ghana, with 6 deaths in the country. Guinea so far has 194 confirmed cases, with no deaths and 11 recoveries. In Central Africa, Cameroon has 803 cases of COVID-19. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the number of infections stand at 215 with 20 deaths. Chad now has 11 cases but no death and 2 recoveries. And Sao Tome and Principe have 4 confirmed cases. To Eastern Africa, starting here in Kenya with 184 COVID-19 infections. The number of confirmed cases stand at 56 in Ethiopia, with 2 deaths in the country, while Tanzania has 25 cases and 5 recoveries. South Africa continues to record a rise in new cases. The country leads the southern part of the continent with 1,934 cases. Mauritius has 314 cases. In Botswana, the numbers have increased to 13, while Malawi has the lowest cases in the region. In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has extended the national lockdown until the end of April to curb the spread of the COVID-19 outbreak. Ramaphosa says more testing needs to be done to get a full picture of the prevalence rate. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
The initial 21-day lockdown period was due to end on the 16th of April. But in a televised address to the nation, President Cyril Ramaphosa says while efforts thus far have shown a level of success, the country is facing a massive struggle ahead.
While it is too early to make a definitive analysis of the progression of the disease in South Africa, there is sufficient evidence to show that the lockdown is indeed working. Since the lockdown came into effect, the rate at which new cases have been identified here in South Africa has slowed down significantly. In the 2 weeks before the lockdown, the average daily increase in new cases was around 42%. Since the start of the lockdown, the average daily increase has been around 4%.
Measures that have already been taken, such as closing the borders and prohibiting gatherings, have contributed to slowing down the spread of the virus, according to the president. And a longer lockdown period will allow government to get a clearer picture as massive testing is being undertaken.
If we end the lockdown too soon or too abruptly, we risk a massive and uncontrollable resurgence of the disease. We risk reversing the gains that we have made over the last few weeks and rendering meaningless the great sacrifices that we have all made.
The lockdown is expected to inflict further damage to an already ailing economy.
As your president, I'm mindful of the great and heavy burden this will impose on you. I am keenly aware of the impact this will have also on our economy. But I know, as you do, that unless we take these difficult measures now, unless we hold this course for a little longer, the coronavirus pandemic will engulf and ultimately consume our country.
The president says government will use the coming days to evaluate how it will embark on risk-adjusted measures that can enable a phased recovery of the economy, allowing the return to operation of certain sectors under strictly controlled conditions.
Our strategy is made up of 3 parts. Firstly, an intensified public health response to slow down and reduce infections. And secondly, a comprehensive package of economic support measures to assist businesses and individuals affected by the pandemic. And thirdly, a program of increased social support to protect poor and vulnerable households.
Public health interventions will also be scaled up. The president, deputy president, ministers and deputy ministers will each take a 1/3 cut in their salaries for the next 3 months. This portion of their salaries will be donated to the Solidarity Fund, a fund set up to help with the efforts to stop the spread of the coronavirus. Ramaphosa also announced that government has established a national ventilator project to rapidly mobilize technical and industrial resources to manufacture non-invasive ventilators which can be used to support patients afflicted with the disease.
I know we shall recover.
Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. Time for us to take a quick break. Here's what's still ahead. Countries in Africa step up efforts to identify cases of COVID-19 and tracing their contacts. And an African president shows how people should be exercising during lockdown conditions.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The South African government has set up drive-through testing centers. It's scaling up its capacity to test more people for COVID-19. Health Minister Zweli Mkhize says the country needs to conduct hundreds of thousands of tests to get the true number of infections. A house-to-house screening campaign has also been launched. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela tells us more.
South Africa has the highest number of the coronavirus cases in sub-Saharan Africa, and government is concerned that infection rates could get out of hand if the virus starts spreading rapidly in the country's poor and overcrowded townships. Hence the drive for mass testing.
The testing kits that we use are safe, they are not contaminated. We encourage people to come to our clinics so that they can get tested. Of course, there was a shortage worldwide, but now we've stocked. Containers are coming through, and there's local production now that has started.
Testing and screenings are being targeted at hotspots. The Health Ministry wants to move away from a testing model focused on people with symptoms to one that is targeted at communities where people with mild symptoms could be slow to seek medical help.
The concerns that we have, it's actually the people who don't come out and test, people who have the symptoms but will then choose to stay at home and not come to our clinics to come and test. That is basically one of the challenges that we're facing as the city.
Currently, according to the National Health Laboratory Service, 5,000 tests a day are conducted. Government hopes to expand that to just over 30,000 a day by the end of April. To this end, the National Health Laboratory Service has procured mobile sampling and testing units that have been deployed nationwide to all districts and metropolitan municipalities in the country. Challenges remain as government continues to ensure the curb of the spread of the coronavirus. These include the lack of social distancing in some areas.
It's one of our challenges, but we are trying with our own health community workers to continue educating our people on the importance of social distancing, especially in our malls, in our informal settlements as well.
Using mobile technology, an extensive tracing system will be deployed to trace those who have been in contact with confirmed coronavirus cases and to monitor the geographical location of new cases in real time. South Africa is on the second week of a 3-week lockdown period. Government is racing to ensure that this virus is stopped in its tracks. It remains unclear whether the lockdown period will be extended or not. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And staying in South Africa, citizens have been coming together during the COVID-19 crisis. The 21-day lockdown has prompted donations and aid from businesses, charities and individuals. They have been bringing help to medical workers and impoverished communities. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa's decisive steps to curb COVID-19 has drawn international praise. Dozens of business and civil society groups, including Gift of the Givers, have answered President Cyril Ramaphosa's call to action during a national lockdown.
Right now, the number one priority is to protect medical personnel. And when I say medical personnel, I mean everybody to do with the patient. Whether it's a doctor, a nurse, a cleaner, we've been to various centers already, taking care of protection of the doctors and medical personnel, food provision, water provision, hygiene packs, toll-free lines for advice, setting up our own testing centers.
The restrictions may help slow the spread of the virus, but it's being felt deeply in the pockets of the poor and unemployed. In Imbazwana village in rural KwaZulu-Natal, there aren't many shops and families have little to eat.
There is no way to make any form of income outside of the social grant. So we're sitting with a humanitarian crisis that is enormous. Enormous. I have 8,000 people living around me in tiny little huts that have no access to water on a good day. They have to walk, some of them 25 kilometers. We need food and water, nothing else. Money doesn't count here.
South Africa has a mammoth challenge of keeping its population healthy and fed. The sense of Ubuntu has come shining through as ordinary citizens are also lending a hand.
The street children, the waiters in the restaurant, the car guards, and everyone who makes an income through somebody's generosity, a handout. All those people are in a difficult situation. But fortunately, again, if you check what's happening in the country, every citizen who can afford it is trying to address that situation.
The question on everyone's lips is whether the lockdown will be extended. It's too early to tell if South Africa is flattening the curve, and the president will have to carefully balance health risks with deepening economic hardship. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
As the world battles the coronavirus, reports of stigmatization and attacks targeting people wrongly believed to have been infected or exposed to the virus have raised concerns. Uganda has witnessed an increase in violence against people who have completed their mandatory quarantine. The country has so far confirmed 53 cases of COVID-19 with no reported deaths. CGTN's Michael Baleke has that report.
A physiotherapy session at a hospital compound. Moses Chiimba suffered a back injury. He was attacked at his home after completing 14 days of quarantine. Moses had recently arrived from Dubai but tested negative of COVID-19.
My village chairman turned up at my house with a mob carrying sticks. I was beaten, I was flogged. My wife called the Ministry of Health, but they delayed to come to my rescue. The police could not save me. They too thought I had the virus. I fell to the ground and collapsed after a heavy blow to my back.
Some members of parliament were recently thrown out of the House after their colleagues accused them of spreading the disease. The legislators had completed mandatory quarantine and been cleared by the Health Ministry after they returned from a trip abroad. Police say they have registered a number of similar cases.
Some are saying even if they go back to the families, you find the children, the wife, the husband doesn't want to come close, and so on. That is very, very dangerous because they don't have the virus, they cannot infect you.
For fear of attacks, victims like Moses are finding it difficult to move freely and settle back in their communities. Viral diseases were in the past associated with places or regions where the first outbreaks occurred. For example, the Zika virus, named after this forest in Uganda. But the UN World Health Organization guidelines stop this practice to reduce stigma, which doctors say harms the mental and physical health of people affected by the disease. The Ministry of Health insists all those who have completed their mandatory quarantine are allowed back in the community after they have tested negative for COVID-19.
Whether we want it or not, government cannot be able to continue holding them because at the end of the day, government works with professional information and advice from World Health Organizations. I want to call upon the public, call upon the family members, please receive our loved ones, receive our dear ones. And please, I also want to call upon the public. Let's not be the ones to begin judging people whether they are sick or not sick without getting proper advice and guidance from Minister of Health.
However, for Moses, the wounds on his body are healing fast. But his doctors say it will take a while to fix his backbone, and the trauma will take months or perhaps years to heal. Michael Balekesi, GTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni has released an indoor exercise video of himself showing Ugandans how to work out in small spaces. This follows a ban on outdoor exercises after groups of people were seen jogging on roads despite a coronavirus lockdown. Isabel Nakiria explains.
President Museveni says he's managed to keep fit through doing physical exercises indoors.
It's good to do outdoors when there's no problem. But when there's need, you can do indoors.
Mr. Museveni is seen in a video doing push-ups and also jogging in what appears to be an office space. The Ugandan leader says to stay healthy, short exercises within the house or compound is just enough. The security forces have been asked to ensure this order is not broken.
No more of these exercises on the roads. Do it on your compounds. And it's done for our good. Do it on your compounds. All of us have a compound where we stay. Once you are told to stay inside, that includes your compound. Kindly use the compound and use your rooms for doing that exercise. And let's leave the roads free so that we break this chain.
President Museveni criticized Ugandans for breaking the coronavirus lockdown by gathering out in groups along the roads to jog. Last year, the country launched a physical exercises day and Ugandans were encouraged to practice healthy lifestyles by regular workouts. Mr. Museveni says the country is dealing with a pandemic and going out in groups makes it easier for the virus to spread. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Coming up in business news. The African Development Bank sets aside $10 billion to help African nations deal with COVID-19.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The African Development Bank has launched a $10 billion COVID-19 fund aimed at helping African countries confront the pandemic. The emergency credit facility includes $5.5 billion for sovereign operations in AFDB countries and $3.1 billion under the African Development Fund, which is the bank's concessional arm for fragile countries. The bank will also provide an additional $1.35 billion for private sector operations. The AFDB joins other multilaterals from the International Monetary Fund to the World Bank in providing emergency funding to developing and low-income countries. The bank sold a record $3 billion debt issue last month to raise financing and help combat the economic fallout from the disease. Staying with the African Development Bank, it has called for temporary deferment of the debt African nations owe to multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. The AFDB says this can be done by reprofiling loans to create fiscal space for countries to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. Adnet Shawashi reports.
According to a March 2020 bank report, these figures could reach $2.1 trillion in 2020. Tunisian authorities have welcomed the African Development Bank's initiative.
We're facing a global health crisis, which has a negative impact on all the world economies, especially the most vulnerable countries. International donors, banks and financial institutions must take responsibility. The African Development Bank is right. The world must adopt to this unique situation with unprecedented economic and social consequences.
Experts say the COVID-19 could cost Africa a GDP loss between $22.1 billion in the base case scenario and $88.3 billion in the worst case scenario.
The Africa Development Bank warned that Africa might fall into recession this year if the current situation persists. Tunisia would not be spared from this catastrophic scenario.
African analysts estimate that the continent's total public debt could increase under the base case scenario from $1.86 trillion at the end of 2019 to over $2 trillion in 2020, compared to $1.9 trillion projected in a no-pandemic scenario.
We were already suffering and tired before the coronavirus crisis. More state debt will only complicate the situation. I hope the world listens to our urgent request.
The African Development Bank president said he supported the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' urgent call for special resources for the world's developing countries and for the suspension of debts of low-income countries in these fast-moving and uncertain times. The Tunisian Observatory of Economy has called on international banks and financial institutions to cancel the debt service of developing countries in 2020 without accumulation of interest and without penalties in order to reduce the economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN.
South Africa's listed property sector is being battered at the moment. The economy is weak, debts are rising, and the spread of COVID-19 is weighing heavily. Commercial landlords are also in a bind with rental agreements not being honored due to a nationwide lockdown. Sumitra Naidu reports.
South Africa's listed property sector showed a 48% loss in the first 3 months of this year. It's the worst quarterly performance in history.
What has happened effectively is that the market has become concerned that firstly, the COVID-19 outbreak will result in reduced activity in the retail space in particular, as well as in the office space for that matter, because people aren't leaving their houses, people aren't spending money, people aren't going to malls. And you could have already seen that come through in the end of Feb, beginning of March, when people were just working on social distancing.
Before COVID-19 hit, the economy was already languishing as a result of widespread electricity cuts. The dreaded ratings downgrade followed, moving the country to junk status.
We were all looking at the downgrade, and we need to be honest that the market has already priced the downgrade in. So the international market had us priced in. I think the slip that we've seen in the rand even further is because of the COVID-19. I mean, most institutions have got their funds and everything in dollar, and that's why the dollar is still so strong against the rand and why we've seen such a slip.
South Africa has around 2,000 shopping malls across the country, but most are closed due to the nationwide lockdown. Some of the big retailers that have been forced to shut down are refusing to pay their rent, leaving landlords out of pocket. Listed real estate trusts have the benefit of tax exemption, but they are designed to pay out 75% of their income to shareholders.
I think one of the things that's worrying them right now is that during these times where your rental income might be quite low, after paying for everything, even if you're just left with a small amount, you might not want to pay out 75% of that to shareholders. You might want to keep some of that in case you start struggling to repay your debt or there are any other types of unforeseen expenses.
In a move to assist small businesses, the Department of Trade and Industry has amended the Competition Act to allow some non-essential businesses to negotiate their rentals and payment holidays during the lockdown. This amendment, though, doesn't include some of the bigger, more established retailers. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
In the Republic of Congo, imported hair extensions have become a much sought-after commodity. The lucrative multi-billion-dollar industry has created numerous business opportunities and encouraged many women in this Central African nation to invest in it. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi brings us the story of a Congolese woman who is making a living out of her handmade wigs in the capital, Brazzaville.
Fashionable Congolese women in Brazzaville are increasingly getting tempted by the ease of changing their style with wigs made of human hair. Whether it's braiding or attaching extensions, Olivier Molopo has been doing it all for years.
These are wigs that we make, and we call them kabelo. We braid them to make wigs that we sell to our customers. However, economic conditions have become difficult compared to our early days, but we're holding on.
With dozens of plastic packages filled with bundles of diverse specifications, Molopo offers her customers a variety of wigs at affordable prices. But business has not been doing well lately due to the coronavirus pandemic.
We buy accessories from China, but since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, it's been very difficult because prices have gone up. For example, wholesale price, which used to be sold at 4,000 CFA, has now gone up to between 6,500 to 7,000 CFA.
For clients to choose and verify the quality of products on offer, Molopo displays her wigs based on color and length. According to estimates, Africa's market for wigs, weaves and hair extensions is worth over $5 billion a year and growing quite rapidly. China remains Molopo's source of pride as most of our products come from the Chinese city of Husheng. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Congo Brazzaville.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. One couple creatively went about organizing their wedding ceremony despite COVID-19 restrictions.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's head over to South Africa. Cape Town has been on a mission to provide shelter for its homeless population during the lockdown period. At these facilities, people are given 3 meals a day and receive medical attention, but some say they prefer being back on the streets.
It's the third week of South Africa's national coronavirus lockdown. President Cyril Ramaphosa has urged his people to sacrifice 2 more weeks of their lives and livelihoods to try and stop the spread of the virus. The city of Cape Town has started providing shelter for some of its most vulnerable citizens, the homeless. But it's proving to be a huge challenge, as many of these nearly 2,000 homeless people have started pushing back, upset that they've been forced to leave their own spaces on the city streets. At first, they forced us to come here. They promised us the moon and the stars. But when we got here, nothing happened. It's like a prison here. I'm very confused at the moment. We just want more information about this virus and how long it will all last.
We are part of government as a whole, and we have a duty looking at the entire city's safety and health. And it's a massive drive also to get those that are sleeping on the streets, get them off the streets so that they get screened, so that they get the necessary medical attention. So that we can determine how many of them do have the virus already or not.
City of Cape Town officials say many of the homeless people being accommodated at this facility face serious health issues. This includes numerous cases of drug addicts who are suffering from severe withdrawal symptoms.
For them, that addiction is much stronger than anything we can offer you. They're not going to easily stay, and they are in and out of trouble with the police in the areas they're from on a regular basis. Many of them have hundreds of priors, so it's not likely that you would get them to stay here. No person is going to be entirely happy here because people are not able to go about their freedom as they wish. On the street, people do what they want.
At the end of the day, the virus and the spread of the virus, the severity of the virus cannot be underestimated.
The city says everyone here has been screened for COVID-19. More than 10 have so far been tested for the disease. They've been isolated in a special tent away from everyone else, while they await the results of their tests. Renée Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
A couple in South Africa has held their wedding ceremony in the comfort of their backyard. This is after the groom recently recovered from the coronavirus and measures were put in place by the government to curb gatherings. Film director Dan Mace made a video of the event that has been viewed more than 250,000 times online.
Sure, today was something else, eh?
Today was the best day of my life.
The couple had initially scheduled the wedding for the 21st of March, but due to measures to curb the spread of the virus, the event had to be postponed.
How did you feel about cancelling our wedding?
Postponing.
Postponing.
It was a really difficult decision having to postpone it. I feel like I'm stuck with those nerves of anticipation now, especially because everything was ready to go.
So the groom-to-be decided to prepare a surprise for his partner. This he hoped will ease the devastation of losing their much-anticipated wedding date. The first step was to create a wedding list. With many of the essentials missing, some things had to be ruled out. He created the rings out of guitar strings, built a makeshift altar, and finally created the guests and various people needed to host the ceremony.
This is Joey's jersey, and on the back is a little pouch, and inside I'll place the rings, and he'll come running down the aisle and deliver us the ring.
It's now time to surprise the bride. Mercy, who has since recovered from the virus, said everything that has happened has brought the couple closer. The couple now plans to make the wedding official in December. Chomgono, CGTN.
Coming up in sports. Safari rallies return to the WRC circuit to take longer as event gets postponed. We begin with motorsports. Officials from Kenya and the International Automobile Federation, FIA, have agreed to postpone July's Safari Rally due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The rally was initially scheduled for mid-July. Sports Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed on Thursday said she held a teleconference with all parties, including the FIA President Jean Todt and Safari Rally CEO Phineas Kimathi. The competition was making a comeback on the World Rally Championship calendar after an 18-year hiatus. The Kenyan government and FIA are expected to agree on new dates for the Kenyan round of the World Rally Championship on Monday. The Kenya Rugby Union has announced the cancellation of all league and cup competitions this season due to the coronavirus crisis. In a statement released on Thursday evening, the union says the directive will affect the Kenya Cup, the Championship, Nationwide Leagues, the Enterprise and Mwamba Cup. The cancellation means there will be no promotion or relegation in any of the leagues, with all teams remaining in their current division. The KRU have become the first sports federation in the country to cancel its entire season over the pandemic. In Britain, English Premier League players have launched a charitable fund to help the